Hi everyone, welcome to the Medicos Community YouTube platform. I'm Dr. Chris Lemos, your anesthesia educator. Today we are going to discuss and analyze the 2023 NEET PG exam questions related to anesthesia. I feel the exam was quite at a moderate level. 3 questions were directly from anesthesia and 1 to 2 questions had a bit of overlap with the other specialties. Bearing in mind that the questions are getting more and more clinical, we have to prepare accordingly for the next exam as well. So let's look at the questions. If you have any feedback about the questions, please feel free to reach us on our official Instagram account or email ID. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at the questions that were covered in the exam. Question number 1 is, when is the following position recommended? Option A is unconscious patient with pulse and respiration absent. Option B, unconscious with pulse and respiration both present. Option C, patient is unconscious with pulse present but respiration absent. And option D, unconscious with pulse absent and respiration normal or present. Now let's look at the position that is given. Patient is lying on his side, right? So this becomes a lateral position. Now lateral position most commonly also called as the recovery position. Recovery position is usually adopted, that is when you want to avoid aspiration. Aspiration as in you want to avoid contents from the stomach from entering the lungs, right? So when will we adopt this position? It will be mostly done when the patient would have pulse and respiration both present. That is your option D. Pulse and respiration both present. Now let's kind of rule out other options. Option A is unconscious with pulse and respiration both absent. Now when pulse and respiration both become absent, this becomes a situation that is suitable for CPR. The steps in CPR are that you will assess for scene safety, you will approach the patient and you will check for respiration and pulse both simultaneously, right? So as soon as both of these are absent, you are going to commence CPR, and the position recommended for CPR is supine. Supine, so that you can access the patient's chest for the chest compressions and the airway as well, in case you have to secure a definitive airway like endotracheal tube. So option A, the answer would have been CPR position, which is supine. Coming to option C, patient is unconscious with pulse present but respiration absent. Now when respiration is absent, this also becomes a situation for CPR, because soon if respiration is absent, the patient might go into hypoxia and hence cardiac arrest. Moreover, if you want to maintain the airway for this patient, the patient would have to be in supine position, where you can have access to the patient's airway in case you want to secure an endotracheal tube, or just maintain the airway with bag mask ventilation. So again, for option C, your best choice would have been supine position. Coming to option D, patient is unconscious with pulse absent but respiration normal. This is just physiologically not possible at all. If the pulse is absent, immediately this becomes again a CPR situation, and here as well the answer would have been supine. So the best option here is option B, which is unconsciousness with pulse and respiration both present. This is mainly just to help maintain and keep the airway patent and to avoid aspiration. So recovery position is to avoid aspiration. And remember, here you want both your pulse and your respiration to be absolutely normal. Okay. Then moving on to question number 2. Which of the following is not an indication for tracheostomy tube? And there's a picture of the tracheostomy tube given. Now options for this question are: option A is upper airway obstruction, option B is upper airway assessment, option C is prolonged mechanical ventilation, and option D is airway toileting or vocal cord palsy. So there was a bit of discrepancy in whatever we got a feedback from the students, but we put forth whatever the best options were given to us. So let's have a look at them one by one. Now option A is upper airway obstruction. Now there is some obstruction in the mouth or at the level of the vocal cords, because of which the patient is not able to breathe, and maybe because of which we are not able to secure an endotracheal tube or to just ventilate the patient from the face, right? Here again tracheostomy tube will definitely be indicated. So we can bypass the upper airway obstruction and get access directly to the trachea. So this becomes an indication. This definitely is an indication. Coming to option B, upper airway assessment. Now upper airway assessment is a simple test which is done at the bedside or when you are doing a pre-op anesthetic checkup for a patient. And if you remember, the components of upper airway would be simple things like check for mouth opening, then you will check for Malam Patti classification, you will check how whatever structures in the mouth are visible. You will also check for simple neck movements. You will also look at the dentition, whether the patient has any loose teeth or any missing teeth or any dentures. So here tracheostomy will not be an indication, right? You do not need a tracheostomy tube for upper airway assessment. So this definitely looks like the correct answer. Upper airway assessment is not an indication. Coming to option C, which is prolonged mechanical ventilation. Now mainly in patients who've had phrenic nerve injury or who have had brain injury and they are not able to breathe, or any other causes for which they are not able to breathe by themselves and need long term mechanical ventilation, initially this patient is going to have endotracheal tube put in. But we cannot keep endotracheal tube for more than 21 days. Otherwise, it will cause a lot of problems in the trachea. It will lead to tracheal stenosis. There will be a lot of edema there, and hence long-term ventilation needs a definitive airway which can stay in long term, and that definitely becomes a tracheostomy indication. So what they do is either they'll go for surgical tracheostomy in the theatres, or they'll put a percutaneous tracheostomy, that is they dilate the tracheal, the gap between the tracheal rings, and they'll place the tube in. So this definitely becomes an indication. Coming to option D, airway toileting or vocal cord palsy, whichever it might have been. Now airway toileting as in clearing the airway for any secretions, right? Whether it's just the airway or they clear the lungs for any secretions, that is they'll give the patient good nebulizations which will help to clear out or loosen these secretions. Then they'll do some chest physiotherapy, and then they'll bring out the secretions and clear it with the suction tubing. Now to clear the airway through the endotracheal tube is very I wouldn't say very difficult, but it's quite a complex procedure. There is a chance that the endotracheal tube also might get blocked, right? So tracheostomy tube becomes a indication for airway toileting, especially in people who are going to be on ventilator for a very long time. So airway toileting, yes, it is an indication for tracheostomy tube. Vocal cord palsy. Now remember, vocal cord palsy is you generally have your larynx and you have your vocal cords. Whenever there is some foreign material which enters here, either cuff or any food particles, the vocal cords quickly adduct. They quickly come together and stop that foreign material from going inside the lungs. So it's a protective mechanism which generates a cuff, and when you start coughing, you're going to bring out those foreign materials outside, right? So if this patient has vocal cord palsy, whenever there is a foreign material, these vocal cord palsies are, these vocal cords are not going to be able to adduct, right? And because of which foreign material can enter into the lungs, and that can cause aspiration pneumonia or aspiration pneumonitis. Therefore, vocal cord palsy is definitely an indication for tracheostomy. Many a times when neurosurgical tumor patients, they undergo surgery, and if the surgeon knows that yes, there might be some injury to the brainstem or from where your vagus and glossopharyngeal nerves arise, they electively do a tracheostomy for the patient and then shift the patient post-operatively to ICU. So this definitely becomes a indication. Now suppose in the exam you come across such a question where you have absolutely no idea what becomes an indication, Remember tracheostomy. Ostomy is opening, making an opening in one's trachea. Now, making an opening in the trachea is not a temporary thing, right? It will only be done if the patient is suspected to be on mechanical ventilation or needs this tracheostomy for a longer time. So, remember, upper airway obstruction, if the patient is not able to breathe at all and is going rapidly into hypoxia, we are going to do something called as front of neck access. So, if there is a difficult airway situation, you'll usually have your plan A, B, C and D in place. Plan A becomes, first we will try to put a endotracheal tube down. For some reason, if you are not able to place the endotracheal tube, then option B becomes, we go for laryngeal mask airway, LMA. Again, if we are not able to secure laryngeal mask airway, then we'll try for bag mask ventilation or face mask ventilation. Now, even if face mask ventilation is not going to work, then we go for something called as front of neck access, FONA, front of neck access. Front of neck access, tracheostomy is also a front of neck access. So, in upper airway obstruction, yes, definitely an indication. Prolonged mechanical ventilation, yes, patient will need tracheostomy. Airway toileting or vocal cord palsy again becomes a very strong indication. So, the only thing, option which is a simple bedside test is your upper airway assessment, definitely not an indication for tracheostomy tube. Then coming to question number 3, again this has to do with airway management or resuscitation as well. So, the question was, all techniques are used in the following maneuver except option A is jaw thrust, option B is manual inline stabilization, option C is chin lift and option D is head tilt. Okay. So, all techniques are used except. Okay. So, let's have a look in the picture properly. So, if you look in the picture, there is definitely a extension of the head is pushed back, right? There is a tilt to the head. So, yes, there is definitely a head tilt happening here, right? Then look at the first picture here. What is happening? They are trying to put pressure on the TM joint here, temporomandibular joint, and they are trying to push the lower teeth above the upper teeth, which is your jaw thrust maneuver. They are thrusting the jaw forwards, okay? So, definitely jaw thrust is seen in the picture, and then they are tilting the chin upwards as seen in this picture. So, jaw thrust, chin lift and head tilt, all the 3 maneuvers are being done in this picture. So, the only technique that is not happening here is your manual inline stabilization, which becomes the correct answer. Now, this technique, the jaw thrust, chin lift, head tilt, also called as your triple maneuver. Why do we need to do a triple maneuver? Is to prevent the tongue from obstructing the airway, right? Prevent the tongue from falling back and obstructing the airway. Now, this maneuver will be done if somebody is not breathing. This is usually also done before we intubate the airway, or also during your bag mask ventilation, right? And this will also help clearing the tongue. So, you're going to prevent the tongue falling back. Now, the option that is mentioned here, manual inline stabilization, what is it? We'll have a look in the next slide. So, other options that could have been is, which is the the picture shows which of the following maneuvers, and the correct option could have been chin lift, jaw thrust if it is given, and 3 other things that are mentioned, or the option could have said chin lift, jaw thrust and head tilt. So, all 3 or any 2 of this are absolutely correct if given in the options. Now, because there were a lot of discrepancies from what options we received from students, this was the best way to frame the question. But in case your option says chin lift, jaw thrust, that becomes the correct option, provided head tilt is not given in any other options. And if it gives all 3 in one option itself, that becomes your correct one. Now, I talked about manual inline stabilization, also called as MILS. So here, compared to the previous picture, the neck is pretty straight, right? There is no head extension given. So manual inline means you're keeping the neck absolutely straight and stable. That is, this maneuver is basically used for cervical spine injuries or fractures, where you do not want to further displace the cervical spine, which can cause trauma or can damage the spinal cord higher up, and that can cause further, quadriplegia or even paraplegia or even phrenic nerve palsy. So especially for cervical spine injuries, they do something called as manual inline stabilization, where they try and keep the spine of the patient absolutely in one line or stable. All right. Then coming to the fourth question and the last one is, which is the drug of choice to prevent infection in patients undergoing cardiac surgery? Option A is erythromycin, option B is cefazolin, option C is amoxiclav, option D is azithromycin. Now this could have been like a question which overlapped with either medicine, pharmac or even surgery. The reason to just include it here is because it talks of prophylaxis during surgery. So this becomes a perioperative prophylaxis. Now why do we need to give antibiotics before surgery? So if you have looked at your WHO protocol for perioperative period, we have to give antibiotics at least 60 minutes prior to incision. Now this is to prevent any skin infection, any skin bacteria from going inside the surgical site and causing a surgical site infection. More so in patients who are undergoing cardiac surgery, there's a big sternal wound, and if that gets infected, it can cause a lot of pain and can take a lot of time to heal. Now even if you were not aware of what would be the best choice, so as a rule, we need to give an antibiotic which is going to give gram positive and some gram negative cover as well, right? So let's look at the options. Out of these, the best option suited here is cefazolin or cefazolin. So cephalosporins are generally first line antibiotics for perioperative prophylaxis. Perioperative prophylaxis. Most commonly they would have they give cefuroxime or ceftriaxone if it's specially a neurosurgery case, or cefazolin, right? So cephalosporins are first line. In case the patient has any infection to cephalosporin, then we give either amoxiclav or teicoplanin depending on what coverage we need. Now if the patient is going to undergo surgery like of the air sinus, maxillary air sinus, sinus surgery, or any intra-abdominal surgery or any perianal surgery where there is a risk of gram negative or anaerobic infection, then we add metronidazole as well to the surgical prophylaxis. So this becomes your first one and this becomes second one to give anaerobic cover depending on if the surgery is going to be in the abdomen or on the air sinuses, right? Coming to other option, amoxiclav is a very simple antibiotic mainly pointed towards gram positive cover. So this won't be the correct option. Erythromycin, azithromycin are again very narrow spectrum antibiotics and usually not given in the perioperative period. So the best option here is cephalosporins, and if the surgery would have been something where somewhere where gram negative or anaerobic cover was needed, then you would add metronidazole as your second line of drug. Okay. So overall that we saw, most of the questions that came across were resuscitation or airway based, quite clinical, and therefore we need to have a look in detail in these topics along with your other anesthesia questions. Thank you very much, and I hope you join us